The neon-drenched corridors of Nexus Station hummed with the whispered conversations of beings from across the galaxy. In the darkest corner of Sublevel 7, where even the security drones feared to venture, the Crimson Collective held their monthly gathering. These were not ordinary criminals, they were the galaxy's most elite assassins, each one capable of eliminating targets that entire armies couldn't touch. Zephyr Darkscale, a reptilian from the Keth Empire, ran his forked tongue across his lips as he studied the holographic display floating above the obsidian table. The contract details glowed in amber text, and the payment amount made even his cold-blooded heart skip a beat. 50 million galactic credits for a single elimination. It was more money than most planetary governments saw in a decade. 50 million, whispered Nexia Void Whisper, her ethereal phantom form flickering between dimensions. The client must be desperate beyond measure to offer such a sum. The third member of their trio, Korax Ironjaw, a massive Orcanian whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed in the artificial light, leaned back in his chair, causing it to groan under his weight. I've seen contracts for galactic senators that paid a tenth of this. What makes this target so valuable? Zephyr's clawed finger tapped the hologram, bringing up the target's profile. The image that materialized caused an immediate chill to descend upon the room. It was a simple photograph of a human female, perhaps 30 years old by their species standards, with brown hair and unremarkable features. She stood in what appeared to be a garden, smiling at the camera while holding a small child. A human, Nexia breathed, her form solidifying as shock overrode her natural phase-shifting abilities. They want us to hunt a human. Korax's mechanical jaw clicked as he processed the information. His extensive databanks, enhanced by military-grade neural implants, began running threat assessments automatically. What they revealed made his optical sensors flicker with uncertainty. Sarah Martinez, Zephyr read from the contract details. Age 32, occupation listed as xenobiologist, currently residing on the research station Kepler 442b. No military training listed, no combat experience noted. She appears to be. He paused, his translator struggling with the human term, a scientist who studies alien plant life. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 of the galaxy's most feared killers, beings who had ended the lives of warlords and crime bosses without hesitation, sat frozen before the image of a woman who appeared to pose no threat whatsoever. It was Korax who finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very walls. I've heard the stories. We've all heard the stories, Nexia replied, her form beginning to flicker again as old fears resurfaced. But, surely they're exaggerated. Humans have only been in space for a few centuries. They're a young species, barely out of their technological infancy. Zephyr's reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile, though on his species it looked more like a snarl. Young, perhaps. But, tell me, friend Nexia, how many species do you know of that went from primitive wood burning to faster-than-light travel in less than 200 years? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Each of them knew the answer, 0. Most species took millennia to achieve such technological advancement, if they achieved it at all. Humans had done it in what amounted to a cosmic blink of an eye. Korax's internal archives began pulling up files he'd hoped never to access again. I was stationed at Orbital Defense Platform Gamma 7 during the Xantharian War, he said slowly. 3 years ago, when the Xantharians made their push into human space. Both of his companions turned to look at him. The Xantharian War was a touchy subject throughout the galaxy. The Xantharian Empire had been considered one of the most militarily advanced civilizations in known space, with a warrior culture that had conquered dozens of worlds. Their sudden and complete disappearance 3 years prior had left a power vacuum that the galaxy was still adjusting to. The humans didn't have a proper military then, Korax continued. No unified space fleet, no established military doctrine for space warfare. The Xantharians thought it would be easy prey, a quick conquest to add to their empire. He paused, his optical sensors dimming as he accessed particularly disturbing memories. I watched the first battle. The humans sent their civilian ships, cargo haulers, scientific vessels, even passenger liners. The Xantharians were laughing over the communications channels, calling it a slaughter. Nexia had stopped flickering entirely, her attention completely focused on Korax's words. What happened? The humans turned their cargo ships into weapons, Korax said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They filled them with nuclear devices and flew them directly into Xantharian vessels. Not guided missiles, actual piloted ships with human crews who knew they were going to die. Zephyr's tongue flicked out nervously. Kamikaze tactics were not unknown in the galaxy, but they were typically used only by the most desperate and fanatical species. For an entire civilization to adopt such strategies immediately upon first contact with a superior enemy was unthinkable. But that's not the worst part, Corax continued. The Xantharians adapted. They started using long-range weapons to destroy the suicide ships before they could reach their targets. That should have ended it. Should have? Nexia prompted. The humans adapted faster. Corax's voice had become mechanical, emotionless, as if his cybernetic components were taking over the task of speaking. Within weeks, they had retrofitted their ships with stealth technology that they'd somehow reverse-engineered from wreckage of Xantharian vessels. Technology that should have taken decades to understand, they mastered in days. The implications of this sent a chill through the room. Technological adaptation was the hallmark of a species' long-term survival potential, but the speed Corax was describing was beyond anything in recorded galactic history. 6 months into the war, the humans weren't just defending anymore, Corax said. They were hunting. Small groups of them would infiltrate Xantharian space using ships that they'd somehow made completely invisible to all known detection methods. They would study their targets for weeks, learning every detail of their routines, their weaknesses, their fears. Zephyr found himself unconsciously backing away from the holographic image of Sarah Martinez. The sweet-faced scientist suddenly seemed far more sinister than any crime lord he'd ever faced. They didn't just kill Xantharian commanders, Corax continued. They would make them disappear. Entire command structures would simply vanish overnight, leaving no trace, no evidence, nothing but empty ships drifting in space. The psychological effect on the Xantharian military was devastating. Nexia's form had become so unstable that she appeared to be little more than a shadow with glowing eyes. How do you know all this? Because I was there when they came for Admiral Krextal, Corax replied. The supreme commander of the Xantharian fleet, surrounded by the most advanced security in the galaxy, aboard a fortress ship that was considered impregnable. He paused, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of true terror. I watched 3 humans infiltrate a ship with a crew of 10,000. They moved through the vessel like ghosts, disabling security systems that our best engineers insisted were impossible to hack. They eliminated over 200 elite guards without raising a single alarm. The silence in the room was now oppressive. Each assassin was imagining themselves in the position of those guards, trained killers who had been outmatched so completely that they never even knew they were in danger. Admiral Krextal was found in his private chambers, Corax said. Not dead. Gone. His personal security footage showed 3 humans in simple black clothing walking into his room. When they left, they were carrying what looked like a large bag. The Admiral was never seen again. Zephyr's claws had begun extending and retracting involuntarily, a nervous habit from his youth on the Keth homeworld. What happened to the Xantharian Empire? That's just it, Corax said. Nobody knows. After Admiral Krextal's disappearance, the entire Xantharian fleet just stopped. Ships began returning to their homeworlds without explanation. Within 3 months, every Xantharian presence in human space had vanished. They pulled back to their core systems and have refused all contact with the outside galaxy ever since. The implications were staggering. An empire that had seemed unstoppable had been so thoroughly broken by a young species that they had retreated into complete isolation. It suggested a level of psychological warfare that went beyond mere military superiority. I heard rumors, Nexia said quietly, that human negotiators visited the Xantharian homeworld after the fleet withdrawal. Something about a peace treaty. Corax's optical sensors flared. Not a peace treaty. A lesson. What kind of lesson? Zephyr asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. According to intelligence reports that I definitely was not supposed to see, Corax replied, the human delegation consisted of 12 individuals. They arrived in a single, unarmed ship and requested permission to land on the Xantharian capital. When they were granted an audience with the Xantharian High Council, they presented a single data crystal. He paused, accessing encrypted files that still made his systems run cold subroutines. The crystal contained detailed personal information about every member of the High Council. Their daily routines, their family members' locations, their private conversations from inside supposedly secure facilities. The humans had been watching them for months, recording everything, learning everything. Nexia's ethereal form began to solidify as the full horror of the situation became clear. They could have killed them all. That was the message, Korax confirmed. The human delegation leader reportedly said, "We know where you sleep, where your children go to school, what you fear most in the dark. We could have taken you all months ago, but we didn't want to rule your empire. We just wanted you to leave ours alone." The three assassins sat in stunned silence, each processing the implications of what they'd heard. The Xantharian Empire had been neutralized not through superior firepower or technological advantage, but through the simple, terrifying demonstration that humans could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. The stories say, Zephyr said slowly, that humans don't just win wars. They make sure their enemies never want to fight them again. Which brings us back to our current problem, Nexia said, nodding toward the holographic contract. Someone wants us to hunt one of them. Korax began running threat assessment algorithms on the seemingly innocent scientists displayed before them. The results were disturbing in their inconclusiveness. His systems couldn't determine if she was dangerous because they had no baseline for human threat assessment. Even the most peaceful human was potentially a genetic descendant of beings who had psychologically broken an interstellar empire. 50 million credits, Zephyr mused. The client must know something we don't. Why offer such an enormous sum for a simple scientist? Maybe that's exactly why, Nexia suggested. Maybe the fact that she seems harmless is what makes her dangerous. The Xantharians thought humans seemed harmless too. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the room's communication system. A new message had arrived on their secure channel, one that made all three assassins freeze in terror. The message was simple, consisting of only text and no identifying information about the sender. "We know about the contract. We know you're considering it. Don't." Korax's cybernetic systems immediately began tracing the message's origin, only to hit dead ends at every turn. Whoever had sent it had routed the communication through 17 different relay points across the galaxy, using encryption methods that his military-grade hardware couldn't crack. "How is that possible?" he muttered. "This is supposed to be the most secure communication network in the galaxy." Zephyr was staring at his personal datapad, his reptilian features pale. "I'm receiving similar messages on all my private channels. Different words, same meaning, don't take the contract." Nexia had gone completely corporeal, her phase-shifting abilities apparently overridden by shock. "My quantum-encrypted private frequency is receiving the same warnings." "But that's impossible, that frequency exists partially outside normal spacetime. Nothing should be able to access it except..." She stopped mid-sentence as the realization hit all three of them simultaneously. The warnings weren't coming from the client, or from law enforcement, or from any known criminal organization. They were coming from humans. Somehow, someway, humanity had detected the existence of a contract on one of their own and had tracked down the three most elite assassins in the galaxy to deliver personal warnings. The implications were beyond terrifying. They suggested a level of surveillance and intelligence gathering that made every secret in the galaxy meaningless. Korax stood up slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the room. "I'm withdrawing from consideration," he announced. 50 million credits isn't worth becoming the next lesson that humans teach the galaxy. Nexia was already phasing out of existence, preparing to leave through the walls rather than the conventional exit. "Agreed. I've survived this long by knowing when I'm outmatched." Zephyr looked once more at the image of Sarah Martinez, the seemingly innocent scientist whose life was worth more credits than he'd ever seen in one place. Something about her smile in the photograph now struck him as knowing, as if she was aware that someone might someday be looking at this image and making calculations about her death. "The client won't be happy," he said, though he was already powering down the holographic display. "They'll probably try to hire someone else." "Let them," Korax replied, his optical sensors dimming as he shut down non-essential systems. "But anyone who takes a contract on a human is signing their own death warrant. The stories don't lie. Humans don't just fight back when you hunt them." "What do they do?" Nexia asked, though she was already more ghost than solid matter. Korax's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom as he delivered his final words before leaving. "They hunt the hunters. And they're very, very good at it." The three assassins departed Sublevel 7 through different routes, each carrying with them the knowledge that they had just dodged the most dangerous contract of their careers. Behind them, the holographic display flickered once more before going dark, leaving only the echo of a lesson that the galaxy's most dangerous predators had learned the hard way. Some prey is more dangerous than any predator, and humans had long ago stopped being anyone's prey. The news of the Crimson Collective's refusal spread through the galactic underworld like wildfire, traveling through encrypted channels and whispered conversations in the shadowy corners of space stations across 17 star systems. Within 72 hours, every major assassination guild, mercenary company, and freelance killer in known space had heard the same story. The three most elite assassins in the galaxy had walked away from 50 million credits rather than hunt a human. On the industrial moon of Zirion Prime, the Iron Talon Syndicate held an emergency meeting in their fortified compound. The syndicate specialized in high-risk eliminations, boasting a success rate that had made them legendary among the criminal elite. Their leader, a scarred draconian named Vex Bloodfang, studied the same contract that had terrified the Crimson Collective. 50 million credits, he growled to his assembled lieutenants, his voice echoing through the reinforced conference room. For one small female. The collective has grown soft in their success. His second-in-command, a cybernetically enhanced insectoid known as Click 7, mandibles clicking nervously. Sir, the intelligence reports suggest there might be valid reasons for their caution. The human species has shown remarkable what? Vex snarled, his massive wings spreading in a display of dominance. I've read the reports. One small war against some empire that got lazy and complacent. Humans got lucky, nothing more. Around the table, 12 of the most dangerous beings in the sector exchanged uncertain glances. They had all heard the stories about human warfare capabilities, but Vex was not a leader who tolerated disagreement or displays of weakness. I have a different theory, Vex continued, his predatory gaze sweeping across his assembled killers. The client offered too much money too quickly. It made the collective suspicious. They think it's a trap of some kind, maybe law enforcement, maybe a rival organization. They're not afraid of the target. They're afraid of who might be setting them up. The explanation was logical, appealing to the paranoid mindset that kept professional criminals alive in their dangerous line of work. Several of the lieutenants nodded in agreement, though Click 7 remained silent. Besides, Vex added, pulling up his own intelligence files on human space, look at their defensive posture. If they were truly dangerous, would they allow alien researchers, traders, and diplomats free access to their worlds? Would they maintain such minimal military presence in their outer systems? The files he displayed showed a stark contrast to most galactic civilizations. Human space was remarkably open, with minimal security checkpoints and, apparently trusting relationships with alien visitors. It was either the behavior of a supremely confident species or a naively trusting one. The target is currently on Kepler 442b, Vex announced, highlighting the research station on his tactical display. A scientific outpost with minimal security and no military presence. The facility is staffed by researchers from 14 different species, all working on agricultural projects. It's perfect. Click 7's mandibles clicked more rapidly. Sir, the facility may appear lightly defended, but human defensive strategies often rely on what? Vex interrupted. Fairy tales and ghost stories? I've killed senators under heavier guard than this research station has. We'll take a small team, eliminate the target quickly, and collect our payment before anyone knows what happened. The draconian leader's confidence was infectious, and, around the table, his lieutenants began to relax. After all, they had eliminated targets in far more challenging circumstances than a peaceful research station. What could one human scientist do against a team of professional killers? Click 7, select our best infiltration specialists, Vex ordered. I want this done quietly and efficiently. No collateral damage, no witnesses, no evidence. We get in, complete the contract, and get out. Within 6 hours, the Iron Talon strike team was assembled. 5 of the syndicate's most skilled operatives, each chosen for their specific expertise. Vex himself would lead the mission, his pride demanded that he personally prove the collective wrong. The team consisted of Shadewalker, a phantom-class being capable of phasing through solid matter, Twin Strike, a dual-minded Gemini whose split consciousness allowed for perfect coordination in complex operations, Null 7, a shapeshifter whose abilities had been enhanced by black market genetic modifications, and Whisperdeath, an assassin so skilled in stealth that even his own species had no record of his true identity. They departed Zirion Prime in a modified stealth corvette, its hull designed to avoid detection by even the most advanced sensor arrays. The journey to Kepler 442b would take 4 days at maximum cruise speed, giving them time to study their target and plan their approach. During the flight, Vex reviewed Sarah Martinez's profile obsessively. Born on Earth, educated at Cambridge University on Terra, specializing in xenobotany with a focus on cross-species agricultural adaptation. Her work involved developing crop strains that could grow in alien soil conditions, potentially solving food scarcity issues for multiple species. She's actually helping other species, Whisper Death observed during one of their planning sessions. His voice was barely audible even in the ship's quiet compartments. Why would someone want her dead? Professional jealousy, Vex suggested. Maybe a competitor who wants to steal her research. Or a corporation that benefits from food scarcity. The reasons don't matter, only the contract does. Twinstrike, speaking through both of their shared mouths simultaneously, expressed the team's growing unease. The financial amount suggests someone very powerful wants her eliminated. 50 million credits could fund a small war. Vex dismissed their concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. Rich clients always overpay when they want something done quickly and quietly. We're overthinking this. As their ship approached the outer edge of the Kepler system, they began their intelligence gathering. Passive scans revealed exactly what the contract had described: a small research station orbiting a habitable planet, with minimal defensive capabilities and regular supply runs from civilian vessels. Security appears to be limited to basic access controls and environmental safety systems, 07 reported, his form shifting through various appearances as he worked. No military vessels in the system, no advanced sensor networks. It's exactly as advertised. Shadewalker phased partially out of normal space, using his abilities to scout ahead at a quantum level. I can detect life signs consistent with multiple species aboard the station. Approximately 47 individuals, including our target. She appears to be in Laboratory Section C, working on some kind of botanical experiments. The ease of their intelligence gathering should have been reassuring, but instead it left the team feeling strangely unsettled. Professional paranoia was a survival trait in their line of work, and something about the situation felt too simple, too straightforward. Maybe that's the point, Whisper Death suggested when Twinstrike voiced their concerns. Maybe humans really are just a peaceful species who trust too easily. Not every contract has to be a complex trap. Vex agreed, though privately he was beginning to understand why the collective had walked away. Not because of any real danger, but because the whole situation felt off in ways that were difficult to define. Still, 50 million credits was 50 million credits, and the Iron Talon Syndicate had never failed to complete a contract. They approached the research station during its night cycle, when most of the staff would be sleeping. Their stealth corvette docked with a maintenance airlock that their intelligence had identified as unmanned during off hours. Infiltration proceeded exactly according to plan. The team moved through the station's corridors like professional ghosts, their combined skills allowing them to bypass every security measure without triggering a single alarm. Shadewalker scouted ahead through the walls, Twinstrike monitored communications channels for any signs of discovery, 07 adapted his appearance to match the station's security uniforms, and Whisper Death eliminated the few automated sensors they encountered. Within 20 minutes of boarding, they had reached Laboratory Section C. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see their target working alone at a research station, completely absorbed in her botanical experiments. Sarah Martinez looked exactly as she had in the contract photographs, a harmless scientist focused on her work, unaware that death was approaching. Too easy, Twinstrike whispered through both mouths, expressing what the entire team was thinking. Vex studied the laboratory layout, noting the multiple exit points and the absence of any security measures more sophisticated than a basic access lock. Sometimes the simplest contracts are the most profitable. Remember, we want this clean and quiet. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. 07 would assume the appearance of a station maintenance worker and enter the laboratory under the pretense of checking atmospheric readings. Once inside, he would eliminate the target using a toxin that would mimic natural heart failure. The death would appear accidental, giving the team time to escape before any investigation could begin. 07 approached the laboratory door, his form now perfectly mimicking that of the station's human maintenance chief. His genetic modifications allowed him to replicate not just appearance but even scent markers and basic biometric signatures. To any security system, he would appear to be exactly who he claimed to be. The door slid open silently, and Sarah Martinez looked up from her workstation with a friendly smile. "Hello, Jim. Working late tonight?" "Just routine atmospheric checks," 07 replied, his voice perfectly matching the maintenance chief's vocal patterns. "Don't mind me, I'll be quick." Sarah nodded and returned to her work, apparently completely trusting. She was examining what appeared to be a flowering plant that grew in strange, geometric patterns unlike anything in the galaxy's botanical databases. Null 7 moved closer, reaching for the concealed toxin injector in his utility belt. The plan was proceeding perfectly. In less than 30 seconds, the contract would be complete and they would be 50 million credits richer. That was when Sarah Martinez spoke again, her voice carrying a subtle change in tone that made every one of Null 7's enhanced survival instincts scream warnings. You know, she said conversationally, not looking up from her work, it's interesting how different species approach stealth technology. Take your ship, for example. The hull modifications are impressive. I can see why you thought it would be undetectable. Null 7's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Outside in the corridor, the rest of the team heard every word through their communication implants, and Vex felt a chill run through his scales. I'm particularly curious about your phase-shifting friend, Sarah continued, still focused on her plant samples. The quantum signatures are fascinating. I don't think we've encountered that particular application of dimensional manipulation before. Shade Walker, who had been scouting through the station's walls, suddenly found himself unable to phase. His abilities simply stopped working, leaving him trapped partially inside a bulkhead with alarms beginning to sound throughout his nervous system. The shapeshifter's genetic modifications are quite impressive too, Sarah said, finally, looking up to meet Null 7's eyes. Though I have to wonder why someone would go through such extensive biological alterations just to hurt people. Null 7 tried to speak, tried to move, tried to shift his form back to his natural state. Nothing happened. His body had simply stopped responding to his commands, though he remained fully conscious and aware. In the corridor, Vax and his remaining team members found themselves facing a nightmare scenario. The research station's lights had changed from their normal warm white to a harsh red, and blast doors were sealing throughout the facility. Most terrifying of all, their equipment was beginning to malfunction in ways that made no technological sense. Twin Strike, report, Vex growled into his communicator. I can't access our ship's systems, both of Twin Strike's voices replied in unison, for the first time showing actual fear. Something is jamming our signals, but not with any technology one recognize. Through the laboratory window, they watched as Sarah Martinez stood up from her workstation and walked calmly toward Null 7, who remained frozen in place like a statue. I want you to understand something, she said, addressing not just the shapeshifter but clearly speaking to the entire team. My work here involves developing food crops that can save lives across 17 different species. Children who would otherwise starve are alive today because of the research being conducted in this laboratory. She paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the very station itself. Someone sent you here to stop that work by killing me. I'd very much like to know who. The implications hit the team like a physical blow. This wasn't just about eliminating a scientist, someone was trying to prevent humanitarian research that could save countless lives. They weren't just assassins anymore, they were instruments in a plan that would cause massive suffering across multiple species. My government has been aware of this contract since it was first issued, Sarah continued. We know about the client, we know about the payment method, and we know about every organization that was approached to fulfill it. Vex felt his blood turn to ice. If humans had that level of intelligence penetration into the galactic underworld, then every criminal organization in known space was compromised. We allowed this to proceed because we wanted to send a message, Sarah said, now addressing the team directly through the laboratory's communication system. Not just to you, but to anyone else who might consider accepting similar contracts in the future. The lights in the corridor began to flicker, and Whisper Death suddenly found himself visible despite his stealth capabilities. His specialized equipment was failing, stripping away every advantage that had made him one of the galaxy's most feared killers. The message is simple, Sarah concluded. Humans protect their own. We also protect anyone working to make the galaxy a better place. If you threaten either, you'll discover that we can be far more dangerous than any story you've heard. Through the station's communication system, they heard the sound of ships approaching. Not just any ships, the sensor readings that Twin Strike could still access showed military-grade vessels designed for rapid deployment and precision strikes. Those are human special forces, Sarah explained helpfully. They've been shadowing your ship since you left Zirian Prime. We wanted to see exactly how far you were willing to go, and what methods you would use. The realization that they had been observed and tracked for the entire mission was devastating to the team's collective psyche. Everything they believed about their skills, their stealth capabilities, and their professional superiority had been revealed as illusions. "You have a choice," Sarah said, her voice now carrying an unmistakable note of authority despite her civilian status. "You can surrender peacefully and provide information about who hired you, or you can resist and discover why the Xantharian Empire chose to withdraw from human space." Vex found himself thinking about the stories he had dismissed so confidently. The reports of human capabilities that he had written off as exaggerations and propaganda. Standing in the corridor of a research station that had somehow become an inescapable trap, those stories suddenly seemed far more credible. "If you surrender," Sarah continued, "you'll be processed through galactic law enforcement and face appropriate charges for attempted murder. If you resist, you'll be dealt with according to human military protocols." The distinction was clearly significant, though none of the team wanted to discover exactly what human military protocols involved when dealing with would-be assassins. "What guarantee do we have that you'll honor that deal?" Vex called out, his voice carrying far less confidence than it had at the beginning of the mission. Sarah's response was immediate and chilling: "The same guarantee every species in the galaxy has, that humans keep their word, even to those who don't deserve it." The blast doors in the corridor began to open, revealing human soldiers in advanced combat armor moving through the station with fluid precision. Their equipment was clearly superior to anything the team had encountered, and their movements suggested training that went far beyond conventional military doctrine. Vex looked at his team, professional killers who had been reduced to helpless targets in a matter of minutes. The 15 million credits suddenly seemed like the most expensive mistake of his career. "Stand down," he ordered, raising his hands in surrender. "We yield to human authority." As the soldiers secured the team with restraints that somehow neutralized each member's specific abilities, Vex couldn't help but ask the question that was burning in his mind: "How did you know we were coming?" Sarah Martinez smiled, the same warm expression from her contract photograph, though now it carried implications that would haunt his dreams. "We didn't just know you were coming. We know about every contract that's ever been issued against a human citizen, and we know exactly who issues them." The words hit like a hammer blow. If that was true, then humanity's intelligence network was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Every criminal organization, every black market dealer, every shadow government in the galaxy might already be compromised. As the team was led away to await trial, Vex understood why the Crimson Collective had refused the contract. It wasn't about the money or the difficulty of the target. It was about the inevitable discovery that hunting humans meant signing your own death warrant, not through violence, but through the crushing realization that you had never been the predator at all. The news of the Iron Talon Syndicate's capture spread through criminal networks across the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Within hours, every major crime boss, mercenary leader, and shadow operative knew that 5 of the most skilled assassins in known space had been effortlessly neutralized by a single human scientist and what appeared to be a modest security response. The details that emerged painted an even more disturbing picture. According to intercepted communications from the human military, the operation had been classified as a training exercise for their special forces. The capture of 5 elite assassins wasn't considered a significant military engagement, it was apparently routine practice for human soldiers. In the VIP lounge of the Nexus Station's most exclusive gambling establishment, Madame Zelthara held court among the galaxy's most influential criminal minds. The Nexthil matriarch had built her empire on information brokerage, selling secrets to the highest bidders while maintaining a network of contacts that spanned dozens of star systems. 50 million credits, she mused, her crystalline features refracting the lounge's ambient lighting into prismatic patterns. The client is still offering 50 million credits for the elimination of Sarah Martinez. Around her table sat representatives from the most powerful criminal organizations in known space. The Void Syndicate, which controlled smuggling operations across 3 sectors. The Crimson Fleet, whose pirate vessels terrorized shipping lanes throughout the Rim territories. The Shadow Market, which dealt in weapons, slaves, and, worse, across the galaxy's darker corners. After what happened to the Iron Talon team, growled Captain Razorgut of the Crimson Fleet, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on Madame Zelthara. Only a fool would take that contract now. Or someone very desperate, suggested Minister Darkwind of the Void Syndicate, his avian features ruffled with anxiety. The client has increased the payment to 75 million credits as of this morning. Someone wants this human dead very badly. Madame Zelthara's laugh was like breaking crystal. The question isn't who wants her dead. The question is why the humans are allowing the contract to remain active. The statement caused a ripple of unease around the table. Every intelligence network in the galaxy had confirmed that human authorities were aware of the contract on Sarah Martinez. They had demonstrated their ability to neutralize any team that attempted to fulfill it. Yet they hadn't moved against the client or demanded the contract's cancellation. Maybe they're trying to identify everyone involved, suggested Lady Blackthorn of the Shadow Market, her pale features barely visible beneath her hooded cloak. Let the contract remain active to see who else might be tempted to accept it. Or maybe, Razorgut said grimly, they're gathering evidence for something bigger. The humans didn't just capture the Iron Talon team, they interrogated them. For 3 days. Whatever those assassins revealed, it was significant enough to make the humans very, very interested. The implications were terrifying to career criminals whose survival depended on maintaining secrets. If the captured assassins had provided information about their previous contracts, their clients, or their methods, then, entire criminal networks might be compromised. I have a different theory, Madame Zelthara announced, her prismatic eyes reflecting the fear she could see in her associates' faces. I believe the humans are waiting. Waiting for what? Darkwind asked, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer. For someone to succeed, Zelthara replied. Think about it logically. They've demonstrated they can prevent anyone from harming this scientist. They've shown they can track and capture the galaxy's most elite assassins. But they haven't eliminated the contract itself. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. What if they want someone to succeed? What if Sarah Martinez isn't just a target, what if she's bait? The silence that followed was deafening. Each criminal leader was processing the implications of what Zelthara had suggested. If Sarah Martinez was bait in a larger trap, then, the humans weren't just protecting one of their own, they were conducting a massive intelligence operation using her as the focal point. Bait for what? Lady Blackthorn whispered. For whoever is willing to pay 75 million credits to kill a xenobiologist, Zelthara replied. The client behind this contract isn't some jealous rival or competing corporation. You don't spend that kind of money eliminating a scientist unless her work threatens something fundamental. Captain Razorgut's cybernetic eye clicked as it processed data from his ship's intelligence networks. I've been running analysis on her research. Martinez specializes in developing crop strains that can grow in previously uninhabitable environments. Her work could potentially end food scarcity for multiple species. Food scarcity is profitable, Minister Darkwind observed. Entire economies are built on controlling agricultural resources. If her research succeeds, it could destabilize commodity markets across the galaxy. The pieces were beginning to form a larger picture. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a random target, her work posed a direct threat to some of the most powerful economic interests in known space. Her research could potentially free billions of beings from dependence on controlled food production. So the humans are using her as bait to identify and eliminate a threat to galactic food security, Lady Blackthorn said slowly. They're not just protecting one scientist, they're protecting the future of multiple civilizations. Madame Zelthara nodded, her crystalline features reflecting the growing understanding around the table. And anyone who takes the contract becomes part of a conspiracy against humanitarian aid that affects billions of lives. The humans aren't just dealing with assassins, they're dealing with war criminals. The criminal leaders exchanged glances, each calculating the risks of remaining in a galaxy where humanity was actively hunting threats to interspecies cooperation. The stories about human capabilities were beginning to seem less like exaggerations and more like carefully understated warnings. There's something else, Razorgut said, his voice dropping to a mechanical whisper. My intelligence sources indicate that the humans have been tracking the money. This revelation sent another wave of fear through the group. Criminal organizations depended on untraceable financial transactions to operate. If humans had developed the ability to track payments through the galaxy's most secure financial networks, then every crime boss in known space was potentially exposed. How is that possible? Darkwind demanded. Galactic financial networks use quantum encryption that should be unbreakable. Should be, Razorgut agreed. But human technology has consistently exceeded all known theoretical limitations. They went from wood burning to faster than light travel in 2 centuries. Maybe quantum encryption isn't as secure as we thought. Madame Zelthara accessed her own financial records, running security checks that had always been reliable in the past. What she found made her crystalline form dim with shock. They're in our networks, she announced. Right now. I can detect trace signatures in my personal accounts that shouldn't exist. The others immediately began their own checks, only to discover the same terrifying truth. Human intelligence had somehow penetrated every secure financial network represented around the table. Every transaction, every hidden account, every carefully laundered credit had been exposed. How long? Lady Blackthorn asked, her voice barely audible. Unknown, Zelphara replied, though her analysis suggested months or possibly years of surveillance. They've been watching our money move through the galaxy's financial systems without our knowledge. The implications were staggering. If humans had been monitoring criminal finances for an extended period, they possessed enough evidence to dismantle every major criminal organization in known space. The fact that they hadn't acted suggested either incredible patience or a larger plan that hadn't yet reached completion. Captain Razorgut stood abruptly, his cybernetic enhancements allowing him to process the threat assessment faster than his organic companions. I'm withdrawing the Crimson Fleet from all operations in human space, effective immediately. We're pulling back to the Rim territories until this situation resolves itself. Running won't help, Darkwind observed. If they can track our finances, they can track our ships. If they can monitor our communications, they can find us anywhere in the galaxy. Then, what do you suggest? Razorgut demanded. It was Lady Blackthorn who provided the answer that none of them wanted to hear: we cooperate. The word hung in the air like a curse. Criminal organizations survived by operating outside legal authority, by maintaining independence from governmental oversight. The suggestion that they should voluntarily surrender that independence was antithetical to everything they represented. Cooperate how? Zelphara asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. We identify the client behind the contract and turn them over to human authorities, Blackthorn replied. We demonstrate that we're not part of the conspiracy against galactic food security. We show that we understand the difference between criminal enterprise and crimes against civilization. The distinction was crucial, though none of them had realized it until faced with humanity's response to the contract on Sarah Martinez. Theft, smuggling, even piracy were criminal activities that affected limited numbers of individuals. Attempting to eliminate research that could end hunger for billions of beings was something entirely different. It was an attack on the fundamental survival of multiple species. The humans aren't treating this as a law enforcement matter, Zelphara realized. They're treating it as an act of war against galactic civilization. The realization explained everything: the overwhelming response to what should have been a simple assassination contract, the extensive intelligence gathering, the demonstration of capabilities that went far beyond conventional security measures. Humanity wasn't protecting one scientist, they were defending the principle that humanitarian research should be protected by any means necessary. If we provide intelligence about the client, Darkwind said slowly, what guarantee do we have that the humans won't turn their attention to our other operations? What guarantee do we have that they won't anyway? Razorgut countered. They've already demonstrated they can track our finances and monitor our communications. The only question is whether they consider us enemies or simply criminals. The difference was significant in terms of their likely survival. Criminal organizations could potentially coexist with human authority, provided they didn't threaten humanitarian interests. Enemies of humanity, based on the Xantharian example, simply disappeared. Madame Zelphara accessed her most secure databases, pulling up every piece of intelligence she had gathered about the contract on Sarah Martinez. The client uses a shell company called Galactic Agricultural Solutions, she announced. But the real money comes from the hegemony. The name caused an immediate reaction around the table. The hegemony was a loose alliance of the galaxy's most powerful agricultural corporations, entities that controlled food production across dozens of worlds. Their influence was vast enough to topple governments and start wars. If the hegemony is behind this, Blackthorn said quietly, then Sarah Martinez's research threatens the entire foundation of their power. Her work could make their controlled agriculture obsolete. Which means, Razorgut concluded, that the humans aren't just protecting one scientist. They're preparing to go to war with one of the most powerful economic forces in the galaxy. The scope of what they had stumbled into was becoming clear. This wasn't just about an assassination contract, it was about the future of galactic civilization. The question was whether criminal organizations wanted to stand with humanity against forces that would deny food to billions for profit, or whether they wanted to be classified as enemies of humanitarian progress. I'm transmitting our intelligence to human authorities, Zelphara announced, her decision made.
Everything we know about the hegemony's involvement, their payment methods, their shell companies.
All of it. That's suicide, Darkwind protested. If the hegemony discovers we betrayed them, if the humans discover we didn't cooperate, Zelphara interrupted, we won't live long enough to worry about the hegemony's revenge. One by one, the other criminal leaders came to the same conclusion.
The choice wasn't between crime and law enforcement, it was between survival and extinction.
Humanity had made it clear that threats to humanitarian progress would be eliminated, regardless of their power or influence. As the meeting broke up, each leader carrying copies of intelligence that would be transmitted to human authorities within hours, Captain Razorgut voiced the question that haunted all their thoughts: what happens when the humans discover that the hegemony has been manipulating food supplies for decades? That they've been deliberately maintaining scarcity to increase profits? Madame Zelthara's crystalline features reflected the station's lighting one final time before she departed. I think we're about to find out why even the galaxy's most elite assassins refuse to hunt humans, she said. Because when humanity decides to hunt something, it doesn't just die. It ceases to exist. The criminal underworld's cooperation with human authorities would mark the beginning of the most significant shift in galactic power structures in recorded history. But none of them yet understood that their decision to betray the hegemony would ultimately save not just their own lives, but the lives of billions of beings who depended on the humanitarian research that Sarah Martinez represented. The intelligence provided by the galaxy's criminal organizations reached human authorities within 6 hours of the Nexus Station meeting. What followed was a cascade of revelations that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. The hegemony wasn't just behind the contract on Sarah Martinez, they had been systematically suppressing agricultural advances across multiple species for over 3 centuries. Deep within the classified archives of the Human Intelligence Service, Director Elena Vesquez studied the incoming data streams with the cold efficiency that had made her legendary among her peers. The holographic displays surrounding her workstation showed financial networks, communication intercepts, and shipping records that painted a picture of deliberate genocide through starvation. 17 billion beings, she said to her assembled senior staff, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The hegemony's artificial scarcity policies have killed 17 billion sentient beings over the past 200 years. The number was staggering, representing more deaths than most galactic wars combined. Her staff, composed of some of humanity's most capable intelligence analysts, worked in stunned silence as the scope of the hegemony's crimes became clear.
Agent Marcus Chen, the service's specialist in economic warfare, highlighted sections of the financial data that the criminals had provided. They don't just control agricultural production, he reported. They control the distribution networks, the seed banks, even the soil treatment technologies that determine crop yields. Any world that attempts to develop food independence finds their resources mysteriously compromised. How? Director Vasquez asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Sabotage, mostly, Chen replied. But also economic manipulation, political interference, and, in some cases, direct military action through proxy forces. The Keth famine of 2387 wasn't natural, the hegemony deliberately introduced crop diseases to destroy their harvest and force them into dependency contracts. Agent Sarah Kim, whose expertise in xenobiology made her invaluable for understanding the broader implications, pulled up biological warfare data that made even the hardened intelligence professionals uncomfortable. The draconian blight that devastated their homeworld in 2391 was artificially engineered, she announced. Genetic markers in the pathogen clearly indicate laboratory modification. The hegemony didn't just allow it to happen, they created it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Biological warfare against civilian populations was considered one of the most serious war crimes in galactic law. The fact that it had been deployed to maintain economic control made it even more heinous. And Sarah Martinez's research threatens all of this, Director Vasquez observed. Her crop strains can grow in any soil condition, resist known diseases, and produce yields high enough to eliminate scarcity. Her work would make the hegemony's control system obsolete overnight. Agent Chen brought up projections that showed what galactic food production could look like with Martinez's research widely implemented. Within a decade, hunger could be essentially eliminated as a factor in galactic politics. No more famines, no more dependency relationships, no more economic control through scarcity. Which is why they're willing to pay 75 million credits to have her killed, Agent Kim added. Her death would set back humanitarian agriculture by decades, possibly centuries. Director Vasquez studied the tactical displays that showed hegemony assets throughout the galaxy.
Corporate facilities, private military forces, political allies, financial networks, the organization's influence was vast enough to challenge most governmental authorities.
But not human authority. Recommendations, she asked her staff. Full exposure, Chen replied immediately.
Release all intelligence to galactic media, expose their crimes, let public opinion force governmental action. Targeted elimination, Kim suggested. Identify key hegemony leadership and remove them through covert operations. Decapitate the organization before they can adapt to the threat. Agent Rodriguez, the service's specialist in psychological warfare, offered a third option: we make them surrender voluntarily. Demonstrate capabilities that convince them resistance is futile, then, offer terms that preserve some of their interests in exchange for cooperation.
Director Vasquez considered each option while studying the intelligence reports.
The hegemony had killed billions through artificial starvation, but they had also maintained food distribution networks that currently fed trillions.
Destroying them too quickly could cause humanitarian disasters that would dwarf their crimes.
We're going with a modified version of Rodriguez's approach, she decided. But the terms won't preserve their interests. They'll preserve their lives, nothing more. She activated the secure communication array that connected her directly to the hegemony's leadership through channels that had taken human intelligence years to establish. The response was immediate. Apparently, the organization had been expecting contact from human authorities. The holographic projection that materialized showed Consortium Director Valdris Kef, the reptilian who had controlled hegemony operations for nearly a century. His scaled features showed the kind of cold calculation that had made him one of the most feared beings in galactic commerce. Director Vasquez, he said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to wielding absolute power. I assume this contact relates to certain recent difficulties with independent contractors. It relates to your organization's crimes against galactic civilization, Vasquez replied, her tone making it clear that this would not be a negotiation between equals.
75 million credits for the elimination of humanitarian research. Biological warfare against civilian populations.
Artificial famines that have killed billions of sentient beings.
Valdris's eyes narrowed, though his expression remained controlled.
Those are serious accusations.
Do you have evidence to support such claims?
In response, Vasquez transmitted a data package that contained everything the criminal organizations had provided, plus additional intelligence that human services had gathered independently. Financial records, communication intercepts, biological warfare evidence, shipping manifests that showed artificial scarcity creation, everything.
Valdris's composure cracked as he reviewed the evidence. Where did you obtain this information? From your former allies, Vasquez replied. It seems that even career criminals have ethical limits.
They find genocide through starvation distasteful. The implications were clear: the hegemony had been betrayed by the very criminal networks they had relied upon to maintain their operations. Their illegal activities were now fully exposed to human intelligence, and, by extension, to human justice.
What do you want? Valdris asked, his earlier confidence replaced by visible concern. Complete cessation of all activities that restrict food production or distribution, Vasquez replied. Full cooperation with humanitarian research initiatives.
Reparations to affected species totaling, let me see, 17 billion lives at current galactic life insurance values.
That comes to approximately 400 trillion credits. The number was large enough to bankrupt most star systems.
Valdris's expression made it clear that he understood the impossibility of meeting such demands through normal means.
That's impossible, he said. The hegemony doesn't have access to that level of resources. Then, you'll liquidate all assets and transfer them to humanitarian relief organizations, Vasquez replied calmly.
Your corporate infrastructure will be repurposed for food distribution rather than scarcity maintenance.
Your private military forces will be disbanded. Your political allies will be re-evaluated. The terms amounted to the complete destruction of the hegemony as an organization.
Valdris's reptilian features showed the kind of fury that had started wars, but also the calculation that recognized superior force when confronted with it.
And if we refuse, he asked.
Vasquez smiled, and the expression carried implications that made even a hardened criminal like Valdris uncomfortable.
The same thing that happened to the Xantharian Empire when they threatened human civilians. You simply disappear. You're threatening war against a galactic economic power, Valdris protested. The disruption to food networks could cause famines that dwarf anything you claim we've done.
You've already caused those famines, Vasquez replied. The only question is whether they continue under your control or end under ours.
We've spent the past 3 years developing alternative distribution networks in preparation for this conversation.
The admission that humans had been planning this confrontation for years was devastating to Valdris's sense of control. It suggested that everything the hegemony considered secret had been known and countered by human intelligence.
You've been preparing to destroy us, he said, the accusation carrying undertones of respect for such long-term planning.
We've been preparing to eliminate a threat to galactic civilization, Vasquez corrected. Your organization represents the systematic murder of billions through artificial starvation. That makes you war criminals on a scale that exceeds most planetary genocides.
Agent Chen activated displays that showed the alternative food networks humanity had secretly established.
Corporate partnerships with ethical agricultural companies, shipping arrangements with reformed criminal organizations, research facilities that had been developing advanced growing techniques independent of hegemony control. You've been building our replacement, Valdris observed with something approaching admiration.
We've been building your improvement, Vasquez replied.
Food distribution networks designed to eliminate scarcity rather than maintain it.
Agricultural research focused on feeding people rather than controlling them.
The scope of human planning became clear as additional displays showed financial networks established to handle reparations, legal frameworks for prosecuting those responsible for artificial famines, and rehabilitation programs for species that had been deliberately kept dependent on hegemony supplies.
The galaxy doesn't know yet, Vasquez continued.
Your crimes are still secret, your complicity in genocide still hidden. You have a choice: surrender voluntarily and face justice, or resist and face elimination.
What guarantee do we have that surrender won't simply result in our execution?
Valdris asked.
The same guarantee every species has received from humanity: we keep our word, even to those who don't deserve it, Vasquez replied, echoing Sarah Martinez's earlier statement to the captured assassins. Cooperation means trials, imprisonment, reparations. Resistance means you cease to exist.
Valdris was quiet for several minutes, his reptilian mind calculating odds that clearly weren't favorable. The hegemony's power had depended on secrecy and the inability of victim species to coordinate resistance. Neither advantage existed when facing human opposition. If we surrender, he said finally, what happens to current food distribution? Billions of beings depend on hegemony networks for survival.
Those networks continue operating under new management, Vasquez replied.
The infrastructure remains functional, but the artificial scarcity ends immediately. Your distribution systems will be used to deliver food rather than restrict it.
And the people responsible for past policies
will face justice appropriate to their crimes, Vasquez said.
Genocide through artificial starvation carries severe penalties under galactic law.
But prosecution is preferable to elimination. Valdris's expression showed the weight of a decision that would affect the lives of trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The hegemony's surrender would end centuries of artificial hunger, but it would also destroy the organization that had defined his entire existence. We surrender, he said finally, his voice carrying the exhaustion of absolute defeat.
The hegemony formally yields to human authority and agrees to full cooperation with humanitarian relief efforts.
Wise choice, Director Vasquez replied. Transition teams will arrive at your facilities within 72 hours.
All hegemony personnel are to remain at their posts until proper handover can be arranged. As the communication ended, Agent Chen asked the question that had been troubling him throughout the negotiations: what if they try to sabotage the networks before we can take control? They could cause massive famines out of spite.
Director Vasquez's smile was the same expression that had convinced Valdris to surrender.
They won't. Because they know that if billions die from sabotage, we won't just eliminate the hegemony.
We'll eliminate everyone who ever worked for them, their families, their species' political leadership, and anyone else we deem responsible. The threat was delivered with the casual certainty that had characterized humanity's approach to protecting humanitarian interests. Agent Kim realized that they weren't just dismantling a criminal organization, they were establishing a new principle in galactic politics: threats to humanitarian aid would be met with consequences severe enough to discourage future attempts. Sarah Martinez's research will be released to all species simultaneously, Director Vasquez announced to her staff. Along with the evidence of hegemony crimes and the story of how criminal organizations chose cooperation over complicity in genocide.
The galaxy was about to learn why even the most elite assassins refused to hunt humans. Not because humans were particularly dangerous as individuals, but because humanity had made the protection of humanitarian progress a matter of species survival for everyone involved. 6 months after the hegemony's surrender, the galaxy was a fundamentally different place. The release of Sarah Martinez's research had triggered what historians would later call the Great Agricultural Revolution, as species across hundreds of worlds implemented farming techniques that eliminated scarcity almost overnight. But the greater change was psychological. Every sentient being now understood that humanity would go to extraordinary lengths to protect humanitarian progress. On the former hegemony stronghold of Kepler Station, now renamed Liberation Hub, representatives from 47 different species gathered for the first intergalactic humanitarian council. The irony was not lost on anyone that the facility that had once coordinated artificial famines was now serving as the headquarters for galactic food security initiatives. Sarah Martinez stood before the assembly, no longer just a xenobiologist but the unwitting catalyst for the most significant shift in galactic politics in recorded history. Her research data scrolled across holographic displays while delegates reviewed implementation reports from their respective worlds. Crop yields on draconian worlds have increased by 400%, announced Ambassador Kreshtar, his reptilian features showing an emotion rarely seen among his species, gratitude. For the first time in centuries, our people are not dependent on imported food supplies. Similar reports came from delegates representing species that had suffered under artificial scarcity for generations. The Keth, whose homeworld had been devastated by engineered famines, reported that their population was finally beginning to recover. The Insectoid Collective announced that their hive worlds could now support population growth that had been impossible under hegemony restrictions. But the most significant change was evident in the rehabilitation centers that had been established for former hegemony personnel. These were not prisons, exactly, but facilities where beings who had participated in genocide through starvation were forced to confront the consequences of their actions while contributing to humanitarian relief efforts. Director Valdris Kath, the former hegemony leader, worked in one such facility on the planet New Hope. His daily routine involved managing food distribution networks, the same networks he had once used to maintain artificial scarcity, now repurposed to ensure that no being went hungry. The work was supervised by human personnel, but the irony was entirely intentional. "It's remarkable," he said during his daily report to his human supervisor, Agent Sarah Kim. "The efficiency improvements when you optimize for feeding people rather than controlling them. Food production capacity was never the limiting factor, distribution and artificial restrictions were." Kim nodded, studying reports that showed the psychological rehabilitation of former hegemony executives was proceeding better than expected. Confronted with the direct consequences of their policies, most had undergone genuine transformations that made their continued participation in humanitarian efforts possible. "Any thoughts on the Nexthil situation?" Kim asked, referring to the latest crisis that was testing the new galactic order. The Nexthil Empire had been attempting to restrict access to Sarah Martinez's research, claiming that rapid agricultural development threatened their traditional economic structures. Their government had been making increasingly hostile statements about human interference in galactic affairs. "They'll surrender within a week," Valdris said with certainty. "I've seen the intelligence reports on human capabilities. The Nexthil leadership knows what happened to us, and they're smart enough to recognize superior force." His prediction proved accurate. 3 days later, the Nexthil Empire announced that they would fully implement humanitarian agricultural reforms and welcome human oversight of their transition. The speed of their capitulation demonstrated how thoroughly the galaxy's power structures had been redefined by humanity's intervention in the hegemony crisis. In the depths of space, aboard the human vessel Indomitable, Captain Elena Rodriguez reviewed intelligence reports that painted a comprehensive picture of the new galactic order. Criminal organizations had transformed themselves into legitimate enterprises focused on humanitarian logistics. Former enemies competed to demonstrate their commitment to reducing suffering across their territories. Even the most authoritarian governments had begun implementing social programs that would have been unthinkable before humanity demonstrated its willingness to enforce humanitarian standards. "It's working better than we projected," reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson Wu, the ship's intelligence officer. "Voluntary compliance with humanitarian standards is approaching 93% across monitored systems." Captain Rodriguez studied the data with satisfaction. The aggressive protection of Sarah Martinez had been part of a larger strategy to establish humanity's commitment to galactic humanitarian progress.
The demonstration had been so effective that actual enforcement was rarely necessary. The mere possibility of human intervention was sufficient to ensure compliance.
Any new threats to humanitarian personnel? She asked.
None significant, Wu replied. The assassination attempt against Dr. Martinez appears to have been the last serious effort to target humanitarian researchers. Word has gotten out that humans protect their own and anyone working to reduce suffering. The success of the strategy was evident in the reports that crossed Rodriguez's desk daily. Research stations that had once operated under tight security now welcomed alien visitors. Scientific cooperation between species had reached unprecedented levels. Most importantly, the systematic starvation that had killed billions was becoming a thing of the past. Back on Kepler 442b, Sarah Martinez continued her research in laboratories that had been expanded far beyond their original capacity. Scientists from dozens of species worked alongside her, developing agricultural solutions that addressed the specific needs of their homeworlds. The facility that had once been an isolated research station had become the center of galactic food security. The atmospheric modifications you suggested for the aquatic collective's kelp forests are showing remarkable results, reported Dr. Kathanael, one of her alien colleagues. Yield increases of 600% in the first growing cycle. Sarah nodded, reviewing the data with the calm efficiency that had made her a target for assassination and, subsequently, a symbol of human protection for humanitarian progress. Have you considered the applications for the deep dweller colonies? Similar atmospheric conditions might allow them to develop food independence for the first time. The conversation was interrupted by a priority communication from the Liberation Hub. Ambassador Tvera, representing the newly reformed Galactic Council, appeared in holographic form with news that would reshape the galaxy once again. Dr. Martinez, she began, her crystalline features reflecting excitement, we've received a transmission from the Xantharian Empire. They're requesting permission to send a delegation to study your research. The request was extraordinary for multiple reasons. The Xantharians had maintained complete isolation since their psychological defeat by humanity 3 years earlier. Their willingness to break that isolation suggested that even the most traumatized species recognized the importance of humanitarian agricultural advances. What are their terms? Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer would be significant. Complete cooperation with human oversight, Ambassador Tvera replied. Full implementation of humanitarian standards across their territory. And, formal apology to the human government for their previous aggression. The implications were staggering. The Xantharian Empire's return to galactic civilization under humanitarian principles would demonstrate that even the most thoroughly defeated enemies could be rehabilitated through exposure to human protection of humanitarian values. Approved, Sarah said without hesitation. Schedule them for the next available research exchange program. As the communication ended, Dr. Kathanael expressed the wonder that many beings felt when contemplating humanity's approach to galactic politics. Your species has achieved something unprecedented. You've made humanitarian progress more powerful than military conquest. Sarah smiled, the same expression that had appeared in her original contract photographs but now carried the weight of galactic transformation. We didn't make humanitarian progress powerful. We just made sure that anyone who threatens it understands the consequences. The truth of her statement was evident in every aspect of the new galactic order. Species competed to demonstrate their commitment to reducing suffering. Criminal organizations transformed themselves into humanitarian logistics companies. Even the most authoritarian governments found ways to improve their citizens' welfare. The message was simple and had been communicated so effectively that actual enforcement was rarely necessary. Humanity protects those who work to make the galaxy a better place, and eliminates threats to humanitarian progress with whatever level of force proves necessary. In the VIP lounge of Nexus Station, where the galaxy's criminal leaders had once planned assassination attempts, Madame Zelthara now coordinated legitimate shipping operations that delivered food supplies to underserved colonies. Captain Razorgut had transformed his pirate fleet into a humanitarian relief organization. Lady Blackthorn operated refugee assistance programs across 3 sectors. 50 million credits, Zelthara mused as she reviewed shipping manifests for food deliveries to former hegemony territories. That was what someone offered to kill the woman who ended galactic hunger. Best money we never made, Razorgut replied, his cybernetic eye focusing on supply chains that now saved lives instead of restricting them. Can you imagine if we'd been stupid enough to take that contract? The question was rhetorical, but the answer was evident in the fate of those who had opposed humanitarian progress. The Iron Talon Syndicate no longer existed as an organization, its former members either dead or serving lengthy sentences in rehabilitation facilities. The hegemony had been completely dismantled, its assets redistributed to humanitarian relief efforts. Most telling of all, the assassination contracts on humanitarian researchers had simply stopped appearing. Not because such research was no longer valuable, but because everyone in the galaxy now understood that threatening humanitarian progress meant facing human justice. The humans didn't just protect one scientist, Lady Blackthorn observed as she coordinated refugee settlements that had once been impossible due to hegemony-induced scarcity. They established a new law of galactic civilization: humanitarian aid is sacred, and those who threaten it will be eliminated. The transformation was so complete that younger beings across the galaxy had begun to take humanitarian protection for granted. The idea that someone might once have been willing to kill researchers working to end hunger seemed absurd to species that had grown up in the post-hegemony era. But, in the secure archives of Human Intelligence Services, Director Elena Vasquez maintained files that ensured the lessons of the Martinez crisis would never be forgotten. Detailed records of how close the galaxy had come to losing potentially decades of humanitarian progress. Documentation of the methods used to identify and eliminate threats to civilian welfare. Most importantly, evidence that humanity's commitment to protecting humanitarian advancement was absolute and non-negotiable. Any new threats to humanitarian personnel? She asked Agent Shan during their weekly briefing. None detected, he replied, reviewing intelligence from across the galaxy. The demonstration appears to have been sufficiently comprehensive. Even theoretical discussions of targeting humanitarian researchers have essentially ceased. Director Vasquez nodded with satisfaction. The strategy had worked exactly as designed. Overwhelming response to a single threat had established principles that